Greetings, you intrepid Herle Burly-ites. We have a hell of a hurly-burly for you today, and we're going to get right to it because cabinet ministers are on tight schedules, and you don't keep them waiting, goddammit. The Honourable Monte McNaughton is our guest today. Mr. McNaughton is the Minister of Labour, Immigration, Training and Skills Development in Ontario. A son of Newbury, Ontario, he's been sitting as a Progressive Conservative MPP representing the riding of Lambton-Kent-Middlesex since 2011. And here's where I'd like to take this conversation today. How do we help working people? What's the role of unionization? What is this government's agenda with regard to protection for ununionized workers? What is this government's agenda with regard to the labor shortage, the big issue in the Ontario and the Canadian economy today in particular? There's a lot to chew on with a very active Minister of Labour, Monte McNaughton. Thank you for joining us, Minister. Really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Well, David, really great to be on your show. And I have to tell you, I love the work that you do, all the guests that you have, and I learned a lot from your show. So great to be on with you.
Well, thanks very much. Listen, how are you? How have you been spending your summer?
Well, at the legislature, Queen's Park has a summer sitting, as you know. So we've been here a lot, but getting the people's work done.
Getting the people's work done. Any break for you? Anything? What's a break you might take over the summer?
Well, my family and I did head up north for a week. So that was great. My wife enjoyed that, and my daughter and I did as well. And then, of course, in September, we have the plowing match coming up, which is 2 days for MPPs right. to meet with our farmers across the province.
When you went on your vacation, did you choose the right to disconnect?
As much as I could, yeah.
Yes. Hey, let's talk a little bit, before we get into the issues, I'd just like to know a little bit about you. Can we talk about your background a little bit? Where are you from?
Well, as you said, I'm from the small village in southwestern Ontario, the village of Newbury. Born and raised there. Our family had a home hardware store, and I often say, as a Minister of Labour, I can't say at what age my dad had me, stocking shelves and cleaning washrooms and sweeping floors. Right. But grew up there, and in fact, I know we'll talk about it later. But really, that's where I met a lot of tradespeople in that business, loading lumber trucks. And then I was on town council for a number of years there. My mentor in life actually is my grandfather, who is the reeve of our small town, was instrumental in getting a hospital built. Right. So proud that, to call Newbury home.
Right. How big was Newbury?
402 people. 402
people. Okay, it's a genuine village. It's like Prelate.
It is. We count every soul.
And was it your grandfather's inspiration that got you into politics, or what made you interested in politics?
Absolutely. I mean, my grandfather actually passed away about 5 years before I was born, but I read, sort of his history. He spent literally 2 decades getting a hospital built in our town, 4 counties health services. It's still going today. In fact, I was the MPP when we celebrated the 50th anniversary. So it was, really his story that inspired me to get into politics. And then in grade 8, back in 1991, I had the opportunity to be a legislative page at Queen's Park when Bob Rae was the premier. And that's when I really set sights on running provincially someday.
That's when you realized you were a conservative?
It is, actually, yeah. And it's funny you say that, because our group of pages delivered the first NDP budget in Ontario to all of the members. So it was, from that moment on, I became a Tory.
Did you always have an ambition to be elected? Did you start as an organizer and become elected, or did you always have it in your mind you wanted to be an elected person?
I always wanted to be elected. Yeah, and it was my experience on town council in our small village, and then running for the nomination provincially, and finally winning in 2011.
Yeah. All right. Interesting. So when you became the Minister of Labour, and you can disagree with any of the premises in my question that you want. When you became the Minister of Labour, there was a pretty toxic relationship between the PC party and almost all unions in the province, most of whom had campaigned against the party for several elections in a row. And the Premier repealed immediately the raise in the minimum wage and some of the employment law changes that the Wynne government had brought in. Things have changed a lot since then. What's happened?
Well, I think for me, it all began in June of 2019 when I became the Minister of Labour, when the Premier called me and asked me to take on that role. Previously, I was the Minister of Infrastructure. But in those first 100 days after June of 2019, I really hit the ground running, put my head down to meet with over 100 labor leaders in the first few months. And then, of course, marching in the Labor Day parade. But I just came to this role with the belief that government, labor, and business have to work together. We have such massive challenges here in Ontario, the labor shortage being the biggest one. And I just think that we all have to be around the table to come to solutions, work together to ensure that there's more opportunity for workers out there. And I remember taking the plan to the Premier, and he was really, really supportive of working with labor and finding common ground. And I've said this a lot. There's a lot of common ground between labor and Conservatives. We value hard work. We want job sites and workplaces to be safe for workers. We want to spread opportunity to get people into better jobs with defined pensions and benefits. And that hard work certainly has paid off, but there's still more to do.
So when you went out there and you started meeting with labor leaders, what did you hear?
Well, look, certainly there was a lot of tough conversations because in the past, for decades, Conservatives look for support in Canada from Bay Street. In the United States, they look for support from Wall Street. And I believe that there's no future in Conservative politics without looking to workplaces and job sites for support. So again, I really just wanted to find that common ground with labor. And as I said, there's a lot of common ground out there, and we've been able to really partner together. I think of the skilled trades and the union-led training. These training centers that unions run have, in some cases, a 98% success rate in ensuring that tradespeople become licensed. And they're making damn good money with pensions and benefits. It's good for Ontario.
Before we get into any details, I just want to ask you this sort of very broad question, because it really is a thing that has preoccupied me for years and years, which is that when you look at the data over decades and decades now, the share of the economic proceeds of the country that go to working people has been shrinking. And the share of it that goes to people who already have a lot of money and are making money off investments has been growing. And do you think that's this bigger problem as I do? And what can we do about that?
It is a problem. Look, I've said many times that Conservatives focus on deficits and focus on cutting regulations. A lot of that obviously is important, but there's more things that governments of all stripes need to be doing to help working people. It's one of the reasons why I am promoting the skilled trades. These are jobs that pay six figures with defined pensions and benefits. We need more people with pensions and benefits. That's how we're going to ensure that people can build families, they can contribute to their charities in their own communities, but also they can retire in dignity. I want a better deal for working class people, plain and simple. And all of the things I believe that we've done in the last couple of years is going to lead to that.
This isn't specific to your government. It's all true of all governments in Canada and maybe in the Western world. Why do we tax labor more than we tax capital? Why is a dollar of income that is earned through somebody working at a construction site taxed at a higher rate than an investment dollar?
Well, look, that's obviously a very complex question. Again, workers need a better deal. That's why we're investing in working class people across this province. One of the things I think is exciting is that there's more investment in the province. I think of the electric vehicle manufacturing that's coming. That's going to result in thousands of union jobs, well-paying jobs, again, with pensions and benefits. So, we're on the right track. We obviously have to figure out the labor shortage challenge. And by working with business and labor, we're going to figure that out.
Okay. But do you think it? So when you're as the Minister of Labour, though, you would have a point of view in cabinet about things that are, say, as broad as I just raised. That's part of your mandate, is to advocate for working people overall, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been asked, am I the minister for labor or of labor? And I think our track record speaks for itself. I'm the minister for labor and certainly advocate for working class people every day.
What ought to be the role of unions in our economy? Do we need more of them, less of them? At various points, both of those points of view have been expressed. Where are you at right now?
Well, I'm a big believer that workers should have the choice, and they do have the choice here in Ontario. Look, unions spread opportunity widely and fairly. I mean, again, going back to the skilled trades, I think of our automotive sector, I think of those construction jobs and many others. I mean, unions are advocating on behalf of their workers to get that defined pension and benefit. That's good for workers in the province. And I think that's the change that we've led here in Ontario to be a Conservative party, to be fully on board with union-led training and supporting these private sector unions is resulting in better standards of living and better quality of life for people.
Right now, there's unions trying to unionize some traditionally non-unionized shops. Starbucks comes to mind, for example. And they're facing some pretty strenuous pushback and fight from the employers. What do you think about that?
Well, look, yeah, you cite an incident, I guess, or a situation in the United States. I mean, our labor laws here in Ontario are clear. Workers have the right to unionize, and we have the Labor Relations Board that acts as a referee, but our labor laws are clear, and I think they're balanced here in Ontario, and I leave it to the workers to decide.
Okay, so you don't think there's an economic disadvantage to unionization? I mean, historically, there's been a point of view that unions were a relic of the past, that this would have been something you would have heard in the 90s and 2000s for sure. Unions are a relic of the past. They're inefficient. They keep our businesses from being competitive. They're hidebound. They don't allow you to be nimble enough for the new economy. These are all the things I've heard over the years. But that's not your point of view.
No, and I think it's changed a lot. I mean, the pandemic has certainly changed everything. One story that's not told very often, David, is that there's actually companies coming forward and they're self-certifying with unions. The labor shortage is adding to that, but some companies are, self-certifying their company, so they're unionized, and in essence, they outsource their HR to some of these unions. I mean, I think of some construction companies. There's such a labor shortage. They like the idea of calling the union hall to find workers. But we've taken a balanced approach. We're working with open shops, and we're working with unions and employers right across the board, and we're making a lot of progress.
And who manages the employer side of this? Do you manage the employer side of this? I mean, I remember when Wynne brought in, I was working with Kathleen Wynne when she brought in the increase in the minimum wage and the employment law protections for days off, etc. And like the Ontario Chamber of Commerce and the business community went crazy.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think everything's changed with the pandemic. I'm proud that I was the Minister of Labour working with Premier Ford to raise the minimum wage. It'll be $15.50 an hour on October the 1st. We are going to be moving forward with portable benefits, which is really exciting because it means millions of workers in Ontario today that don't have health benefits and dental benefits are going to have those benefits. And I see this as an economic issue. I mean, it's obviously important for the workers, and that's the most important thing. But if we want to retain and attract talent, then paying our workers more is good, and ensuring that they have benefits will attract people here to Ontario. And I mean, I banned the non-compete clauses, which also improves labor mobility and will keep workers here in Ontario as well.
Tell me about that change in business mindset over COVID. That's really interesting to me. So their business community is now more comfortable with, for instance, higher minimum wages than it was 4 years ago?
I would say absolutely yes. I mean, many small businesses and businesses of all sizes are paying more than the minimum wage anyways, because they have to. I mean, the market has certainly changed, but I think of that minimum wage increase when we announced it to $15 an hour and now $15.50. Like overnight, about 700,000 workers got a pay raise. And obviously with the cost of living going up, we needed to do it.
It's astonishing how many people work for relatively low wages. Eh?
Yep, it is.
Like
it's
an awful lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing wages going up, which is a good thing, and that's why I think there's a lot of support within the business community.
So you mentioned this. I want to get into it now. I mean, one of the big things is gig workers or contract workers, people that don't have employment status, but nonetheless are working long hours, and they have no protect, or they, before you brought in your legislation, had no real protections, and you've brought in legislation to protect them somewhat. Can you tell me about it?
Yep, we passed the Working for Workers legislation. We did two, one last year, and then a second one earlier in 2022. We brought in the first set of foundational rights for gig workers in Canada. So they're going to have a minimum wage during active hours. They're going to have a pay stub for the first time, transparency on how they're paid, how the algorithm works. The other component that I think is really important of that legislation that passed is if there's a workplace dispute, it'll be resolved here in Ontario. In the past, if workers wanted to file a workplace dispute against one of these gig companies, they'd have to go to Europe or somewhere else. So those will be resolved here in Ontario. So certainly, gig workers are going to be better off under this legislation. It's a starting point. As I said, we're the first in Canada to do this, and there will be more to come down the road. Yeah.
The minimum wage part's interesting to me. I don't know if I understand this properly. So can you help me? If you're an Uber driver now, you go out and you work an 8-hour shift driving Uber, are you guaranteed 8 times $15.50? Are you guaranteed that the time that you are on fares has to equal $15.50 for those chunks of time?
Yeah, it is for active hours. And, we saw stories over the last number of years where during active hours, some gig workers were getting like $3 and $4 an hour. So we made it so they're getting a minimum wage during active hours.
So active hours means the time they're on the job.
Right. If they pick you up and drop you off, they're getting minimum wage while they're working.
Okay, but while they're waiting, they're not getting anything. While they're waiting for it. So
just during active hours, yeah.
I mean, because one of the things I didn't understand when I was helping the government of Ontario is like personal support workers, home care workers. Let's take home care workers. They're going from one home to another to help people, and they don't get paid for the time that they're in transit. Like, what the fuck is that? Like, how are they supposed to do their job? How are they supposed to make enough money in the course of a day if the transit isn't included in their job?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm glad that we moved forward with a pay increase for PSWs. It's certainly long overdue. It should have been done years ago. In fact, we're having it's 27,000 more PSWs, and they're going to be providing patients with more hours of care during the day, which will make a big difference for them. But certainly, they deserved a pay raise, and they're getting one.
What did they get a pay raise to?
It's $3 an hour on top of what they're getting.
Right. All right, Herle Burly-ites. Last week, I promised to take you on a world tour for the next few weeks. Well, I call it a world tour. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, calls it international best practices of countries who are making evidence-based policy decisions around how they manage their spectrum, those invisible radio waves that make wireless connectivity possible. And importantly, what the results are for their innovation economies. So let's go to South Korea. We'll spend a couple of weeks there, which is good because I like the barbecue. South Korea is stomping Canada on accessing the benefits of 5G. Full stop. Here's why. They auctioned all their mid-band spectrum and their millimeter wave back in 2018. We only managed to auction half of our mid-band in 2021, With the remainder on the docket for 2023, millimeter wave hasn't even come up yet. Maybe late 2023? Executive summary. South Korea is getting this stuff out faster and cheaper. What does it mean for network quality? 5G coverage of 98% of the population. Downloading at 3 times the speed of Canada's fastest wireless carrier. That's TELUS, by the way. So it's service quality, but it's also a competitive issue, eh? South Korea is way out in front of us in their innovation economy. Just a couple of examples. Their smart factory solutions now include 5G AI robot that can filter out defective products in less than 8 seconds. They're also piloting a 5G smart hospital that includes services like digital diagnostic pathology and remote surgeries, plus AI-enabled patient care and an OR autonomous robot. It all comes back to policy, Herle Burly-ites, and how government decisions based on mounting evidence from around the world can have a dramatic impact on how we live, stay healthy, fight climate change, and economically prosper in this fourth industrial revolution. Daum Jadu. That's Korean for more next week, or at least it's my Korean for more next week. You're proposing a portable benefits package too. What does that look like? You mentioned defined benefit pension plans, and boy, I'm a big believer in those, but I don't know many people who think that they're the future, because companies, private sector companies, are just not establishing those things anymore. What's your portable benefits package going to look like?
Well, this is a big piece. I mean, this is going to be one thing that certainly benefits millions of people in Ontario. I mean, I think of those people working 2 or 3 part-time jobs to get by. They're going to have benefits that follow the worker. So that's what we're working on right now. It is a big piece. I mean, there's no blueprint anywhere in North America to follow, or anywhere around the world to bring this in. So we struck a panel to come back to me in short order on how to do this. But in essence, it's going to be people that don't have benefits today will have health benefits and dental benefits. So it'll certainly, help so many families out there.
Cool. Who's going to pay the employer portion?
Again, that's going to be part of the plan on how to implement this. There's no blueprint, as I said. I'm, open to the idea of, government playing a role, whether that's from an administrative standpoint or another one. But this plan will come back in short order, and we want to get this implemented as quickly as possible.
But it is a co-fund thing. It's not like it's just a mechanism that people can spend their own money through.
Right. I mean, that'll likely be where it ends up at. But again, we'll wait for the details. This is really, really complex. And we're going to do lots of, consultation with businesses, with workers, with labor groups on how to bring this in so it benefits workers. And again, it's great for businesses. I mean, I met with the tourism and hospitality sector a couple of days ago. I mean, they're desperate for workers. And I know within that industry, they're working to increase wages and to bring benefits in for workers. So this will be all part of the labor shortage solution.
Okay. One last thing on this gig worker thing. And it's sort of the core question, I think, which is, are these people really independent contractors, or aren't they actually employees? Isn't this just a way that employers designating them as contractors get away without providing any of these basic benefits or minimum wage guarantees, and they call them contractors? But I mean, if you are a delivery person for a fast food outlet, and you could be a contractor even though you're not doing anything else. Not like, I'm a contractor, I have 4 different clients at the same time, right? But if you are actually just working for one place delivering pizza, you're an employee.
Yeah, I mean, in the gig economy, it's obviously an innovative economy. It's changing every day. Many people that work in the gig economy do work for a number of apps. I mean, I think of the food-based delivery or the apps that connect people to rides. They're working for multiple ones. As I said, when we introduced this legislation and brought in the first foundational set of rights for gig workers, like, this really is a beginning. I just want to make sure we get this right, because we don't want to stifle innovation. I mean, there's tens of thousands of people joining the gig economy by their choice every single year. But the main thing is, they are better off today under the changes that we brought forward, and there'll be more to come. The other thing is that governments of the past, and even going forward, we need to ensure that governments are keeping up with technological changes. We brought in the right to disconnect, the electronic monitoring piece. If people are working from home, they deserve to know if their employers are monitoring them electronically. So governments really on an annual basis need to be looking at the technological changes and bringing in, legislation and labor law changes to keep up with this pace of change.
Mm. But you don't feel like there'd be any benefit in I mean, maybe some of these jobs, it's impossible to imagine this, but I mean, as much as possible, shouldn't people that are really doing jobs have employee protection rather than be labeled independent contractors?
Well, we're bringing in more protections for gig workers. Again, many jurisdictions have done this differently, and I just want to make sure we get this right. We're going to continue to, see how these changes are improving the lives of the workers in the gig economy here in Ontario. We're the first province to move forward with these changes, and we'll keep, watching this and bringing forward changes in the future.
Courts are going to be important in this, aren't they? I mean, there's going to be court rulings on some of these. There's class action suits in some aspects of the gig economy about whether or not the people are actually contractors or employees, right? So the courts are going to have something to say about this.
Well, certainly, a number of cases come forward, whether it's a labor relations board or to the courts. And, I prefer government to be taking the action, not letting courts sort of rule on these things. And that's why we're bringing forward a lot of these changes. Okay,
cool. So I talked earlier about how much your relationship or the relationship of the government has improved with the unions, but I was really talking about private sector unions. There's a different relationship with the public sector unions. Why is the relationship with the public sector unions more difficult?
Well, I mean, look, I've worked closely with private sector unions, particularly in the skilled trades, whether that's the construction unions, Unifor, many others. The one thing that I think is, really interesting for people to know, in particular, conservatives who, maybe have some old ways of thinking around this, but private sector unions really care about the financial stability and the health of the employers. And it's important for, these unions to have companies that are doing well because they're going to hire more people, pay workers more money, ensure that defined pension is there for many of these workers, and the benefit piece as well. Again, it's about finding common ground. I'll work with any union where there's common ground, and we need to find that common ground and then move forward. And we've been able to do that with obviously many unions.
Are you aware of a new defined? I'm not challenging you. I'm asking genuinely. Are you aware of a new defined benefit plan that any employer set up in Ontario?
Well, I mean, certainly in construction, I mean, there's lots of defined pensions.
That were already existing, right? Yeah, that's right.
But I mean, the good thing is there's thousands of workers, entering these professions, and they're getting that defined pension, which I think is really, really important.
Right. And they've not switched over to defined contribution plans the way so much of the business community has. They still defined benefit?
Yeah. Yeah, many of them, if not almost all of them, with unionized workers.
Okay. So the implication of what you're saying is that the public sector unions are not as interested in the viability of the government as the private sector unions are in the viability of their businesses. Is that the conclusion I'm to take from that?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's just a different relationship. I mean, I met with some union leaders on the public sector side. I know my colleagues at health and education who predominantly meet with those unions. talk to them on a somewhat regular basis, but it is a different relationship. I mean, I think of those private sector unions that I've worked closely with. They're interested in building things, whether it's, the new highway or broadband or expanding natural gas or the subway system or hospitals. The focus is just different.
So, I mean, it's obviously different because you pay them. And so there's an inherently confrontational element to it that isn't there with the private sector unions, because you're not negotiating comp with the private sector unions. And so I get that. When you meet with the public sector, do they share any of your interest in the broader labor reforms? Or do you not have that kind of dialogue with them? Is there any common ground that you guys are working together on?
Certainly. I mean, I would say health and safety. I mean, I hired more health and safety inspectors than any government in the history of the province. Like, that number is at the highest in provincial history. I mean, almost 550 of them now. We worked with them to double the phone line capacity when workers are afraid of his or her health in a workplace or on a job site. They can call the Ministry of Labor. We have multiple languages now for all workers, so they can call in and get help. So we've worked together on the health and safety side. I partnered with a number of unions on training projects to recruit people into the professions. I mean, I think of healthcare workers from the immigration side. Through the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program, we're actively recruiting healthcare workers from other countries so they can come here and be nurses. They'll be, joining public sector unions there. I mean, I have an interesting role as Minister of Labor. We take a neutral approach on, obviously, collective agreements in the public sector, but there are a number of things we're working on from a health and safety side, for sure.
Interesting. Is there a good, is part of the relationship, and I'm actually trying to get to a broader political point here, I guess, a political understanding. I'm not making a point. I'm asking a question, which is there a cultural fit between this government and the private sector unions? I'm thinking about the fact that when Corey Tenike was on this program, he told me that, Liberals don't really understand working people anymore, that we don't really understand, not the precise job, labor characteristics, but we don't really understand as people, the people he described as who shower at the end of the day rather than the beginning of the day. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts about that? I mean, as you've worked with these unions, do you find that on a broad set of worldview things, you have things in common?
Absolutely. I mean, I use that line quite a bit. This province is built by people that shower at the end of the day, not the start. And I think that a lot of blue collar workers feel like they haven't been recognized by past governments and past politicians of all stripes, quite frankly. They also feel that the left have abandoned them. I mean, they're focused a lot on, tearing down statues or changing street names, or the most recent issue that came up was that NDP MP talking about getting rid of ice rinks. I mean, these blue collar workers are concerned about, good jobs with pensions and benefits, raising their family. I remember being in Northern Ontario with a Unifor labor leader at one of the pulp and paper mills. And I spent an hour and a half with him, and he showed me pictures on his phone of his kids and when he was fishing and hunting. So, promoting the skilled trades, recognizing these workers. I spend, every day on a job site or in a workplace with these workers. And, there's a lot of common ground there. And I believe that the Conservatives are the party of working class people. And if Conservative parties aren't going to take that approach, they're not going to be supported.
So, back when COVID first appeared and the economy suddenly became a wilderness of uncertainty, A lot of companies staggered and slashed spending. Our sponsor, CN, did not. I've talked about this here before. During the long months of lockdowns and paralysis, CN did not miss a single day of work. Just about everything at some point moves by train, and had the railway stopped moving cargo, the consequences would have been catastrophic. But a railway is also a high-maintenance thing. Everything is connected to everything else. Tracks need replacing. So do railroad ties. New tracks must be built. Next generations of safety technology arrive. Bridges, often located deep in the Canadian wilderness, need to be repaired and maintained. Road crossings must be kept in apple pie order for the sake of safety. There's a constant need to add new, high-efficiency rail cars in order to expand capacity. In sum, during the first 2 years of the pandemic, CN spent $5.8 billion on maintenance and improvements. Add in the 2 previous years and the figure is $13 billion. 2022 will be no different. CN, in fact, leads the other big Class 1 North American railways, consistently plowing a greater percentage of its revenues back into its fleet and infrastructure. This year, CN intends to replace 425,000 railway ties in the 4 western provinces and 191 miles of rail. It will rebuild 130 road crossings. In some areas, it will upgrade track to allow for faster trains. It will install more sidings where trains can allow other trains to pass. A 2-mile tunnel near Vancouver has a new upgraded ventilation system, allowing more trains to pass through. There are complex plans to alleviate traffic bottlenecks going into the ports of Vancouver and Prince Rupert. These are colossal efforts, and of course the entire point is to ensure cargo is moved safely and on time. In just a few weeks, Western farmers will be shipping this year's grain crop to markets in Canada and beyond. Tens of millions of tons. CN will be ready. So this labor shortage, I need you to give me an economic primer here. Okay? How do we have a situation? You and I were just talking earlier about the number of people that work at low-paying jobs in Ontario. How do we have that situation and have a shortage of people to work in good-paying jobs? How did we end up with this? Too many people working in lousy jobs and not enough people to do good jobs.
Yeah, I mean, there's a shortage right across the board, though. I would say skilled and unskilled shortages out there. I always think back to March of 2020. 200,000 jobs in Ontario were going unfilled. Today, it's double that. I mean, 400,000. This is a trend.
Yeah, but if there were jobs going unfilled, I wish they were at the 7-Eleven and not at the construction site.
Yeah, as I said, it's across the board. I mean, the pandemic the pandemic certainly has changed a lot of things. I mean, I think back to the lady that cut my hair for 25 or 30 years. She wasn't working for a time period during the pandemic, and she's almost 70, and she enjoyed that sort of semi-retirement during that time of shutdown. And she sold her house, and that's her retirement, and she's not going back to cutting hair. So I think that's what we've seen, really across the board, the hospitality, tourism sector, in the skilled trades. I mean, 1 in 3 journey persons today is over the age of 55. So there's many leaving that profession. So it's a demographic shift, and it's one of the reasons why, of course, apart from training, we need immigration to work more effectively for us as well.
Well, okay. So I don't, at the risk of coming off, any wrong step I say here, Minister, could get me canceled. So I'm going to be very, very careful. But I did raise this issue with Kevin Carmichael last week as well. Why is that our first impulse when the labor market tilts in favor of labor? Why is it our first impulse to bring more people in, to rebalance supply and demand, as opposed to finding ways to get existing Canadians to do these jobs? Well, let me just leave it there with that. Like, first of all, I mean, I know that it probably can't be the entire solution, but tell me that we're working hard at upskilling our existing population into these jobs before we're reaching for immigrants.
Oh, I honestly, David, I'm really glad you brought that up, because it is this all hands on deck approach. So, we launched Better Jobs Ontario. We've opened it up to
what is that? I don't know what that is. What is that?
So Better Jobs Ontario is a training program to upskill and retrain people here in Ontario for in-demand jobs. So we're covering the costs up to $28,000 per year. All of the training actually is 12 months or under. So it's really focused and short duration training. We've opened it up to people on social assistance for the first time in Ontario history to help the 864,000 people that are either on OW or ODSP to get training for an in-demand job. Out of that $28,000 per year, we're paying for things like childcare. We're giving living allowances for people to be able to afford to take the training. So I think that's really important to help a lot of people here in Ontario. But I think of some of the training programs that we've done. I mean, a couple of years ago, we launched a training program in Northern Ontario. There was a shortage of 2,500 skilled workers. In one training program, we recruited 600 Indigenous peoples to start work as electricians with the IBEW. So all good union jobs with defined pension and benefits. And then one of the programs I'm really excited about, because this is really new for Ontario, but we're training people that have a criminal record for good paying jobs in advanced manufacturing. And I remember talking to this lady named Colleen in Hamilton about 6 months ago. For 20 years, she could not get a job. She had theft under $5,000, I think, a couple of decades ago. She's married. She has 3 kids, but she'd get to that final interview and she'd have to, talk about her criminal record, and she couldn't get a job. Well, there's an employer in Hamilton, a unionized facility, that hired her and 49 other people for jobs in advanced manufacturing with pension and benefit, like truly changed her life. So it's all of these things that I'm leading, that our government's doing to fill labor shortages. Immigration really is only one, I hate to say it, but one tool in the toolbox.
Right. Do you have a similar program for the broad healthcare sector? Because it's pretty obvious that care is going to be one of the primary job drivers in the coming future. That as people like me start to drool, we're going to need people to take care of us.
I'll be there for you, David.
Thank you very much, Minister. But will you also have trained somebody that I could rely on perhaps more consistently?
Someone that actually knows what they're doing. This is a big piece. I mean, when you think 27,000 new PSWs, I think we're up to about 8,000 or 9,000 out of that 27,000. Thousands of nurses. I mean, we're paying for all of the training. The Better Jobs Ontario, one of the training programs is for PSWs specifically, because all of that training is 12 months or under. So this training, I mean, costs workers nothing to participate in, and they're guaranteed a job when it's over. So, it's trying to remove barriers for people to get the training for these jobs. One other one I just want to highlight, because it's also one of my favorites, but down near Sarnia, we partnered with 3 of the Indigenous First Nations communities, Kettle Point, Walpole Island, and another one. And we partnered with Liuna. And we recruited 60 Indigenous peoples to start careers in the trades. 30 were women. And the barrier was they couldn't get to the union training center because they didn't have transportation. So through the skills development fund that I launched about 1.5 years ago, we paid for a shuttle bus, and we hired one of the female participants named Sarah to drive the bus. She picked them up every day in the morning, got them to the training center and then to the construction sites, took them home at night. Every single one of them is now in a formal apprenticeship, again, pension and benefits, but everyone has successfully completed it. That's the kind of stuff that, we have to do to lift people up and to fill labor shortages.
Yeah, that's pretty. That is pretty interesting. That's pretty interesting. Okay. Another big part of the plan is accreditations.
Yes.
And streamlining and fixing accreditations. I'm an old man, and I've been hearing talk about this as long as I've been in fucking politics. Foreign credentials. How do we unlock foreign credentials? Why are doctors driving taxi cabs? This issue has been going on forever. What are you going to do about it?
Absolutely. So in our first
I have no idea why it's been unresolvable for 30 years, so I don't really know how you would resolve it this year.
No, I remember when we introduced the first Working for Workers legislation. I mean, one of the first parts of that bill is to recognize credentials for professions outside of healthcare. So that's happening now. I've eliminated the Canadian work experience and the number of language tests that's required. But
so I think it seems important. Don't gloss over that. It seems important. There's previously been, you couldn't get a job unless you had worked in Canada, and that became a catch-22 for people. So you're saying if you are credentialed academically, and we approve that, we don't care if you've worked in Canada or not.
You can go and challenge that exam. I mean, you still have to be, you have to pass the test to make sure that, you have those credentials. But I mean, just one example, there was a gentleman who came to Canada. He was an architect, and he had to do this Canadian work experience requirement that the province had for his profession. But it wasn't like working as an architect. It was just to work in Canada. He worked at friggin' Tim Hortons. That was a requirement before he could challenge his exam to be an architect. I mean, it's ridiculous. So for dozens and dozens of trades, I eliminated the Canadian work experience, a number of language tests. They still have to go to the college to ensure that they have the skills and the background to do the work safely here. The part that we're working on now, which is obviously critically important with the healthcare shortage, is on the healthcare side. So I've done all the other professions. The Minister of Health is working on the healthcare side.
So if I've ever in my life seen a good example of gatekeeping, a term I choose advisedly, it is the College of Physicians and Surgeons, which in my view deliberately control the supply of doctors to maintain compensation standards for the existing group of doctors. Are these other colleges in the trade sector that you're referring to, are they like that, or are they looking to expand with as many new people as they can, or are they acting as gatekeepers?
So we've had really good success with the colleges that we've worked with. I mean, in the past, governments, I think, were reluctant to take them on. I wasn't, because the labor shortage is, I think, the greatest economic challenge that we actually have as a province. But they have played ball. I mean, the interesting issue now is that every profession is short workers. So now is the time to be doing these changes and bringing this forward. But, filling labor shortages is one thing. But when you think, David, that only 25% of immigrants who live in Ontario today work in professions that they've studied, it's an injustice to those people. I mean, like you said, they're driving taxis or Uber. They should be working in professions that they've studied for, making more money for themselves, better quality of life, better for their kids. I mean, it's an injustice that we're rectifying, but it should have been done. Governments of all stripes in the past have had an opportunity to do it. They just didn't do it.
And we'll be back in a minute after a message from our sponsor, Google.
How will inflation affect my kids?
Google products are designed to prioritize quality information so you can find news you can trust. Learn how Google supports news in Canada at g.co/news in Canada.
What summer festivals are on now?
Google helps you find the news that matters most to you. Whether you're looking for news from international publications or your local paper, learn how Google supports news in Canada at g.co/news in Canada.
Okay, so the last piece in the puzzle on the labor shortage is immigration. So there's, when I think of immigration with regard to labor shortage, one of the things I think about is the temporary, the agriculture workers program, which something about it just rubs me the wrong way, Minister. I don't know how I feel as a Canadian about the fact that we bring people up from Mexico to do jobs we ostensibly won't do at substandard salaries. And in many cases, apparently, very substandard working conditions. Some of them have just alleged some pretty terrible things in a public letter or something that I saw. And I mean, is that how we have to do agriculture? Like, is there not a price point at which Canadians would take those jobs? How have we ended up with an industry that is built upon bringing in foreigners to do the work?
Well, I mean, I have to tell you, agriculture workers are true heroes. I mean, if it wasn't for them, we all wouldn't have food on our table every meal. The temporary foreign workers program is obviously handled through the federal government. But what I've done is first and foremost crack down on those temporary help agencies that recruit and hire a number of these agriculture workers. I mean, we've seen in the past, workers being paid minimal, like below what the law says, sleeping in, awful conditions on haystacks in some cases, and their passports locked away. I mean, I remember one story. These temp help agencies were like literally locking passports of these migrant workers away. So we've really cracked down on them. There's a registry that's being set up. We've got a dedicated team of investigators to go out. We're going to whack, the rule breakers and law breakers with massive fines. But I would say, on the flip side, like in any workplace or any industry, the overwhelming majority of employers really do a great job. I mean, I know in my riding, the living conditions on some farms are really good, and they treat their workers like family. I mean, in some cases, some of these workers have been coming for 20 or 30 years. But when it comes to immigration, as I said before, like we really have to use it as a tool to fill shortages. So there's the farm worker shortage, but there's shortages in every industry. I mean, construction being a prime example. So we need to get a better deal for Ontario and use it more effectively.
I'm still trying to understand. I'm just feeling dumber the more this conversation goes on. Do we not have enough people in Ontario of working age, or like, are we going to have a bunch of people? Like right now, there's zero unemployment and there's a labor shortage. So literally, I mean, are we short of working age people? Is this the issue?
We need more workers. I mean, just since 2018, there's 500,000 more people working in the province of Ontario. And then we have, the demographic shift, COVID, with people exiting the labor market. So it's all of those things that's really contributing to this. And we're not the only place. I mean, it's across the Western world. It's a big challenge.
Right. And in terms of the agriculture stuff, like people say Canadians won't do these jobs, and I want to understand what people mean by that. Are you of the view that if you offered people $25 an hour to pick fruit, nobody would apply?
No, I mean, I can't speak specifically on the agriculture side because I don't know, if that's the case. But I mean, we know in labor shortages in every sector that they're paying, a lot higher wages, but they're still not finding workers. So it's a challenge. I can't speak specifically if they were paying $25 an hour, if it would be resolved. Look, I think it's all of that. It's not a single solution to the challenge that we're facing.
Okay. Can you explain the immigration plan to me and literally assume I really don't know how immigration works in Canada? I know that there's a point system, and I know that there's already ways in which you qualify to get in by virtue of various credentials, financial, family, various things, point system. But if we're looking particularly for workers to fill a labor shortage, is the idea just to let even more people? We've been letting in about 500,000 people a year, I guess, immigrants.
Canada-wide, yeah.
Canada-wide, yeah. So is the idea just to let more in and hope that we get more workers out of that? or is it more of a rifle type approach where you're looking for specific types of people and seeking those out and bringing them here?
Yeah, it would be more, my position is it's more what you just said in the latter. So this year in Ontario, 212,000 immigrants will be coming here. We support the federal government at their levels. We only select as a province 9,700 of the 212,000. So my advocacy to Minister Fraser and the federal government is to give us more of a say in those skilled workers or economic immigrants that we can bring to the province. I think we're making headway on that. I mean, the federal government has indicated that they're going to increase the numbers that we can select. So the 212 will stay the same, but that 9,700 will increase. And we want to bring in healthcare workers and skilled trades workers.
So that's where I was going. What's a different criteria that you would apply to immigration into Ontario than the federal government would normally apply?
Well, it's the healthcare workers and the skilled trades workers predominantly is what we want to focus on. I mean, out of the 9,700, we're also recruiting 100 entrepreneurs from outside of Canada as well, but it's more on the labor shortage side around the skilled workers. Right.
Alberta's advertising in the rest of the country. Are we advertising around the world for? Because it isn't. I was reading in the National Post this morning, I believe, that we also have a dreadful shortage of STEM, of people that are skilled in the STEM sciences, and we need a strategy to get those people into Ontario too. So, I mean, what do we advertise, or how do we recruit people to come to Canada and become skilled tradespeople?
Well, I can tell you, I mean, the applications are way above what we can select or what we are selecting based on those federal numbers. So, for example, we select 9,700 through the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program, but the number of applications from around the world far exceed that 9,700 number. Hence why we're advocating to the feds to get that number raised. I think by recognizing international credentials, that's really sent a signal to the world that we want them here. To be the first place in Canada to recognize these credentials will make it more appealing to come to Ontario. You can earn a better standard of living and raise your family. So it's things like that we're doing. We are launching a marketing campaign around recruiting 100 entrepreneurs to come, and they'll also focus on promoting Ontario as a great place to live, work, and raise a family too.
Right. How does all this labor shortage affect the economy, Minister? What is the impact right now? Like, for example, I know that you had some aggressive infrastructure building plans in Ontario. I understand they might be in some jeopardy because of a lack of workers in which to do it. What's the overall effect of this labor shortage on the economy in Ontario?
Well, if we want to build these projects on time and on budget, we need the workers to do it. I mean, that subway system in Toronto that we're moving forward with building, it's 60,000 construction workers alone. So if we want to build on time and on budget, we need the workers. There was a really interesting report that Scotiabank brought out about 6 months ago, and they said the costs of not helping the immigrants that are in Ontario work in professions that they've studied is actually costing the economy $20 billion per year in each of the next 5 years, which is one reason why we're focusing on that piece as well. But, from an everyday person's perspective, the labor shortage means longer lineups for people. It's increasing and leading to prices going up for products. And then, just building things and including houses, it just takes longer and it's more expensive. So there's a real economic impact from an individual standpoint and then from the economy as a whole.
Right. Minister, there's one last question. I should have asked it earlier because it doesn't really fit here. But I did want to ask it because
I'm worried about this one.
Yeah,
it's always that last question.
Yeah, no, it's Colombo. It's the Colombo move. Just one last thing. No, it's about public sector comp. And I know that people think that the Wynne government was some people think the Wynne government was a spendthrift government, but at least in one area, I know on wages in the healthcare sector, for example, that they were extremely strict and they had essentially a net zero increase policy. And now this government's come along and put in place its wage restraint program, holding increases to 1%. How long can we hold these wages down in the public sector before that cap is going to blow off and we're going to have to play a lot of catch up on comp?
Well, I mean, the Premier a couple of times during the campaign was really clear that we've got to sit down with our public sector partners as we go forward when those contracts are up and come up to an agreement. Of course, you know, the education workers are at the table now with the government to come up with a deal. But I mean, we've invested so much more in healthcare. I mean, obviously the pandemic impacted things, but we were talking about the 27,000 more PSWs, thousands more nurses. I mean, we're going to have more doctors. It's a huge investment, and we're committing to that.
I just think about, you know, something that the economist Don Drummond said to me about how in the public sector, whether you try to keep the rate of growth of something artificially low over a period of time, eventually it's going to cost you, because you're going to have to play catch up to all that. I mean, so he's always advocated, for instance, don't try to hold increases in spending to zero for 3 years, because then you're going to have to. And I'm just wondering whether we're doing that in the public sector, where we're just delaying salary increases that are going to have to come, and maybe after years of restraint should be coming in any event.
Well, look, the government has a responsibility to be, fair to workers and fair to taxpayers. And, there's a lot of money being invested in the healthcare system. And, as I said, I mean, tens of thousands of additional workers. And we need to ensure that we're there for those existing workers as well. So, the Premier is clear. We'll sit down, we'll work with our partners and come up with a fair and responsible deal.
My understanding is that there's a whole lot of nurses registered in Ontario that are not working as nurses. Why is that?
Well, I know some have left. Certainly during the pandemic, there's a huge recruitment effort being made across the province. One thing that I focus on is the health and safety of healthcare workers. I think in the last 24 months, we've done 13,000 visits to hospitals and long-term care homes and other healthcare facilities to ensure that, those healthcare workers are supported from a health and safety perspective. But it's been challenging for them. I mean, there's no doubt they've worked hard. They've served all of our families. They are healthcare heroes. And it's been a grueling time for them. And there's labor shortages all over. There's people leaving professions of in every industry.
Well, Minister, I just want to say that as a political practitioner, the rapprochement/alliance that you have built with the union movement in Ontario is probably the biggest political realignment development I'm aware of since David Peterson and the Liberals broke through in Toronto. And it's going to change. It already has changed the map. It will change the map more and makes your party more competitive in more places. Hell of an accomplishment. Quite tremendous. And I thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your thoughts about how you're trying to help working people in the province and how you're trying to help the economy. Really great of you to give us your time.
Great. Thanks, David. I love your show, and keep up the great work yourself, and look forward to seeing you in person soon.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Minister. And I'd like to thank, obviously, our presenting sponsor, TELUS, our sponsor, CN Rail and Google, and everybody who watched or listened. Yes, you can watch on the YouTube machine. See you next week with more Herle Burly. Thanks, Minister McNaughton. It was great.
Thank you.
Herle Burly.